I have a peculiar relationship with the Outlast games. I recognize that the Outlast games, particularly the first one, are tight, finely crafted horror experiences, but I didn't enjoy playing them. It's not because they're bad, like, I appreciated the setting, the aesthetic, and the narrative. It's just that I'm not a fan of horror games where the gameplay is limited to walking around and solving basic puzzles. Plus, I don't have much sensitivity to horror in general. For these reasons, I was incapable of appreciating Outlast 1 and 2 the way most people do. Of course, some of you might be wondering why I played them if I already didn't like their style of gameplay. Well, a lot of people love Outlast, and a lot of people wanted me to discuss the stories in both games on my channel. I figured that they were short and simple enough to get through, so why not give them a shot? But when I finished Outlast 2, I was so bored and burned out by the experience that I didn't care to go back and thoroughly research them, which is what normally happens when I do game analysis. But a few weeks ago, I happened to be chatting with one of my Patreon supporters, a gentleman named Corbin. He loves the Outlast games and was excited to hear my opinion on them when I finished playing. When I told him I wasn't a fan, he was surprised. He felt certain that I would really dig them, especially given the expansive lore and how it was inspired by real-life events. I didn't know what lore he was talking about, because at the time, I was only paying attention to the surface narrative. I suppose it was due to my lack of enthusiasm that I was blind and/or unwilling to look into the supplementary material. So, I asked Corbin to elaborate on what he meant, and when he did, I gained a whole new appreciation for the Outlast games. Seriously, thank you, Corbin. This video would not have been possible without your encouragement and your help. Following Corbin's guidance, I researched the Murkoff Corporation, the villainous company behind the events in both games. While researching the Murkoff documents that you can find throughout both games, I noticed references to something called MKUltra, something that is only mentioned in these documents and nowhere else. It is when I began researching MKUltra that I was finally able to perceive Outlast's true horror, the horror that I thought I missed out on. And what made it horrific for me was the fact that MKUltra was real. Some of you might not know about MKUltra, and I think the American government would prefer you didn't. In 1953, the CIA began a series of illegal and immoral experiments on human beings. These experiments, conducted under the name MKUltra, involved the use of psychedelic drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sensory overload, isolation, and electroshocks, just to name a few. These experiments were carried out on every type of person, ranging from drug addicts and criminals to university students. Putting it simply, the US government was attempting to manipulate, erase, or control the minds of their citizens. Why? To fight communism, of course. Ideally, these experiments would result in two things. One, a truth serum that they could administer to suspected Soviet spies, and two, the birth of mind control. If there was a chance that the Soviets were doing it, then the Americans had to do it first. Otherwise, they would risk letting the world be subsumed by communist ideology. The MKUltra experiments did not officially conclude until 1973, 20 years after they were first commissioned. Unfortunately, most of the official documents surrounding MKUltra were destroyed by order of CIA Director Richard Helms. But thankfully, there was a secret cache that was uncovered in 1977 via a Freedom of Information Act request. It is from this cache that we were able to uncover the nature of these experiments and the results they produced. One experiment happened to be carried out on the infamous American criminal James Whitey Bulger. According to Stephen Kinzer's book on the MKUltra experiments, Poisoner in Chief, Bulger was recruited by Dr. Carl Pfeiffer of Emory University to join a medical project that was researching a cure for schizophrenia. He, along with 8 or 9 other men, were injected with massive doses of LSD-25. The results of these injections were as follows. 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state. Hours of paranoia and feeling violent, we experienced horrible periods of living nightmares and even blood coming out of the walls. Guys turning to skeletons in front of me. While this was happening, the other men would hook the test subjects up to machines and ask them questions like, "Did you ever kill anyone? Would you kill someone?" Obviously, these were attempts at trying to find the truth serum. Another experiment involved the hypnosis of 2 women. While in a hypnotic state, one of these women was instructed to pick up a nearby pistol and fire it at the other woman. This woman complied, although, thankfully, the gun was an unloaded, pneumatic pistol. Upon waking, the woman who fired the gun expressed absolute denial that she fired that gun at the other woman. Now, if this sounds familiar to you Outlast fans, it's because this experiment is actually referenced in the game. One of the documents that you can pick up in the administration block is a word-for-word retelling of one of the MKUltra experiments. The only difference is that in the real-life document, the names of the 2 women are redacted. The game creators inserted the names Miss Pierce and Miss Jackson. After 20 years of these types of experiments, the head of MKUltra, Sidney Gottlieb, made the following conclusion, quote, "With the use of enough powerful drugs and other extreme measures, it is possible to destroy a human mind. He had discovered no way, however, to embed a new personality into the resulting void, or to open the wiped-away mind to control by an outsider." Keep in mind that MKUltra wasn't just a conspiracy theory. This stuff actually happened. It was sanctioned by the American government. One would like to hope that these types of experiments ceased back in the early 1970s, but you can never be completely certain. Even if the Americans aren't doing it, who is to say that a more authoritarian regime isn't? If they are, what would that type of experimentation look like, what with our collective advancements in the realms of medicine and technology? Well, Outlast provides us with a few possibilities. In regards to Outlast 2, there is the cult of Temple Gate. They, along with anybody else that entered that area, were susceptible to hallucinations. Unless you read the supplementary material provided in the comic book series known as the Murkoff account, you would only be able to infer what was causing these hallucinations. Apparently, they were caused by radio towers that were set up by Murkoff near Temple Gate, emitting signals that affected the human mind. These signals seem to not only make a human mind more privy to hallucinations, but also make them more willing to believe in the reality of those hallucinations. I liken it to a child who is scared of the noises that they hear in the night, who is then told by their cruel sibling that the noises were caused by the boogeyman. Upon hearing that, the child is now convinced beyond all shadow of a doubt that the boogeyman is lurking in the shadows. Hell, depending on how sleepy the child is and how much they believe in the boogeyman, that child might even believe that they can see it. The signals emitted by the radio towers seemed to have a similar effect, tricking Noth's mind into not only seeing things that aren't there, but also making him believe that these hallucinations are real. The members of Noth's flock are also like the naive child being convinced by their sibling that the boogeyman is real. Worst of all, the radio signals force their minds to project their belief, making them see things that couldn't be anything other than supernatural in their minds. Thus, when Noth speaks about the reality of the Antichrist being born amongst his flock, the denizens of Temple Gate are more than willing to offer up their children to be sacrificed in order to prevent this apocalyptic event. Of course, the main character Blake and his partner Lynn are susceptible to the effects of the radio waves as well. Blake's reality continues to break down and reconstruct, switching between Temple Gate and the religious school he attended as a boy. The things that Blake sees all seem so real, just like when most of us are dreaming. Most often, we do not question the reality of what we are seeing when we sleep, and especially when we are awake, because our brain interprets it as real. Hell, I'm sure that a good number of you barely question the reality of the baby that Lynn gave birth to at the end of the game, despite the fact that the baby casts no shadow. Maybe, given the bombardment of religious imagery and preaching that Blake hears throughout Temple Gate, given the frequent references he makes to the Antichrist, Blake could not help but buy into the reality of what Noth was saying, if only at a subconscious level. This is why he sees a baby, just like the sleepy, naive child might see the boogeyman. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, a human mind cannot be replaced or controlled, but it is prone to hypnotic suggestion. Maybe at some point in the future, the conscious mind could be forced to become a slave to the unconscious mind, unable to distinguish between reality and unreality. Whether that is through radio waves or drugs like LSD is unknown. All we can be sure of is that we better pray that some evil corporation doesn't get access to this type of medicine or technology first. Before I conclude this video, I want to give some attention to the enemy known as the Walrider. What we know about it is that it is a swarm of nanites, animated by the lucid dreaming of a character known as Billy Hope. As for how lucid dreaming animates nanites, well, I'm sure that the developers have about as much understanding of the exact science behind that as we do. They say that it has something to do with the morphogenic engine that Billy is plugged into, but no further explanation is given beyond that. I have a theory as to how lucid dreaming helps animate the Walrider, and it goes back to what Sidney Gottlieb said about the MKUltra experiments. He said that a human mind can't be replaced by another type of mind, nor can the mind be fully controlled, especially when we're conscious. Why was this the conclusion? Was it due to the fact that science and medicine weren't up to snuff during that 20-year period? Yes, but there's also the question of whether or not science and medicine would ever be capable of quantifying the human mind. Some sci-fi stories believe that the human mind or soul is capable of replication. For example, games like SOMA, Observer, and the Talos Principle demonstrate a reality where minds are replicated by artificial intelligence. But in regards to Outlast, it seems that the human mind is so complex that it isn't quantifiable. It cannot be replaced or reconstituted. However, what seems to be possible in the Outlast universe is the use of one mind to animate another. I believe that the morphogenic engine reads the electrical signals given off by Billy Hope's brain, and then the Walrider replicates those signals. It is necessary for Billy to be in a lucid dream state because that is when the unconscious and conscious mind are both activated. If those two elements aren't simultaneously activated, then the morphogenic engine can't read the electrical signals produced by both, and thus the mind can't be imitated. It might be impossible for our feeble minds to perceive the mathematical formulas which govern the human mind, but maybe equipment could be produced that could replicate not only the processing power of a human brain, but also mimic its electrical functions. We would just need to find a way to hook the human brain up to a machine that could replicate the brain's organic function into digital signals, and then use those signals to wirelessly control something else. Let's just hope that if that technology is birthed, it isn't done to birth a weapon like the Walrider. After all, nanotechnology will be a part of our day-to-day life very soon. Let's hope that when that happens, the control of those nanomachines or nanites rests in moral hands. Outlast really has some underrated lore. Even if you aren't a fan of the gameplay, like myself, I would recommend researching the world that the developers have set up around these games. It's truly thought-provoking. If you'd like to see me cover more Outlast lore in the future, please let me know in the comments section below. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like, that helps me out a lot. Also, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss more Spooktober coverage. Got another horror game analysis coming up soon from the PS2 era. It's one that you guys have been requesting a lot. Until that video releases, I just want to remind you, as always, stay yellow.